Hello and welcome to episode 34 of Something Inventive. Today we'll be looking through lots of different things to do with social media, and because of that I've got a special guest on, Jonathan Pollinger, who is an expert in that sort of thing. We talked about Jonathan last episode, I think, with Al, looking through his predictions. So we're going to dig into some of those and why he does these predictions. But before I go and rattle on, Jonathan, why don't you just introduce yourself? You've been on before, but perhaps for new listeners, introduce who you are.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Pollinger, and my thing is very much social media. So no other aspect of marketing, although obviously social media links into other aspects of marketing, but my focus is very much social media. And within that, it's also very much about training as well. So I have dabbled with other areas like strategy and social media management in the past, but now very much focused on training via one-to-ones, in-house workshops, and increasingly actually via Skype and similar tools online. And I've been around for a while actually, especially in the social media world. So this is actually my 10th year now.
Is it? Yeah, we've been going similar times actually in terms of our businesses. We're in our 10th year as well. So
right, exactly.
Happy 10th year, Jonathan.
And to you.
Well, we'll talk more about your business later, because I've got a topic in the agenda about your rebrand from one company name to another and why you did that. I'm interested personally as to why you went down the road that you went down, because I think it's an interesting one. But first, I want to talk about the predictions. This is something in the last episode Al and I talked about, really looking at taking a few of your predictions and talking through whether we agreed with you, what we think would happen. And I think if anyone is interested in looking and finding out more about your predictions for 2019, 2020 in terms of what's happening in the social media space, I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes, but I'm not going to dive into them today. I think what I want to speak to Jonathan about is why you do this, looking at maybe your past predictions and seeing how close you were on them.
First of all, it's a bit of fun. It's quite good to try and get the crystal ball out and see what's coming down the line. But perhaps more seriously, oh, by the way, this whistling, I have to apologise for that. It's the wind on my balcony, so there's not a lot I can do about it. Particularly windy day here in Cardiff Bay. So yeah, on the business side, though, more seriously, perhaps with predictions, if you know what is going to happen in the future, then you can prepare for that, and actually you can get ahead of the competition a little bit, because if you start in, say, a space that's going to be big or with a particular feature that's going to be really big and popular, you can have sort of first mover advantage of that and get in there before other people do. That can be advantageous. And also, if you do that at an early stage, then you can actually learn more about it and perhaps become more expert at it than latecomers. And I guess third reason would be, it's just kind of fascinating. I think everybody's fascinated by the future. I've noticed on LinkedIn and on the web, writing certain articles, as people with the job title futurologist these days. So it's kind of like an area I think that people are fascinated with. So fun, it's got a business purpose, and it's just a general interest.
And is it something you walked into in that you came across, you had ideas and you thought, will you jot them down, or was it quite a purposeful intent writing these predictions down?
I would say it's kind of like a lead on from trends, because I've always been interested in trends, and trends themselves are kind of almost a definition of a trend is sort of what's popular at this current point in time. But also, I think if you're spotting a trend, it's generally when you're on the cusp of it and it's actually about sort of become full blown. So in a sense, that's a bit of a prediction. And again, for the business reasons stated, if you can tap into current trends, so for example, big ones at the moment would be mobile messaging and video. If you can get your head around those, then that can again give you a big advantage and an edge on your competitor. So a link in from trends, which I'm always talking about in training and workshops.
It's interesting you were saying about trends and getting ahead of them. And actually, once you can see a trend, usually the trend is heading towards its peak or is at its peak. I once heard someone talk about investing like that, and saying that if you hear that your uncle is about to invest in a particular company or a house or some large sum of money, the housing market or the economy is at its peak and it's going to crash, because that's when people feel most confident. But it's actually not necessarily the time you want to invest. And it seems very similar with trends. It's like, actually, you need to spend the time looking ahead and making these predictions, so you can get a feel for what's going to happen, and then testing that and seeing whether you're right on the other side.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's a very good parallel.
So yeah, coming to that, how right have you been?
Okay, so maybe on the negative side, back in end of 2017, it was admittedly a bit of a jokey one in my defense, but I did predict that Facebook were going to open a chain of coffee shops, and that hasn't happened yet. But at the same time, I was looking at Facebook having the possibility of getting into the hardware space, and that one's come true. So because they've got a Facebook speaker out now, similar to Amazon Alexa and Google Home. So so that's an area that they've got involved with, and I wouldn't be surprised to see more sort of hardware products come along there. Another one kind of like confirmed by Mark Zuckerberg yesterday, actually, this year, forecasting a move from what I would call public sharing to private sharing, specifically talking about business, whereby companies are sort of having to talk to people on an individual basis, personal basis now, which there's more of an expectation of that from the public, and also the other way around, with people contacting companies with questions and customer services issues increasingly via Twitter direct message, WhatsApp, and via Facebook Messenger, or directly via message via a Facebook company's Facebook page. Yesterday, Mark Zuckerberg was talking about how he sees future sort of trend of social networks moving from how he described it as a town square to a more sort of living room kind of space.
Explain that a little bit more.
Okay, so in other words, rather than the general thing of posting, say, a photo or a video onto Facebook and then that appearing in the newsfeed of your friends, he's talking about sending that to a group of friends or an individual friend via WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. So yeah, I think all I can say is that we're kind of like in agreement there.
So is that about having smaller networks, really? So rather than posting publicly, you're posting much more within your inner circle of friends instead?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably the word niche is sort of suitable there, and the business point of view. So we're also seeing that with increasing popularity, and indeed Facebook expanding the functionality of Facebook groups. So, there's always been groups for yoga, archery, bowling, football, whatever. But I think we're seeing those groups become more active now, and people spending more time in those groups rather than perhaps on pages or in the newsfeed. Because in the newsfeed, yes, you can control it, but I think it's kind of like a thing that I talk about a lot. A lot of people don't realize that you can, which is a bit of a shame, and perhaps Facebook could make that a bit easier. So they sort of like see their news feed and say, oh, that's rubbish, and they go and either look for something else to do entirely, or if they go to a group and they're interested in the subject of that group, say, I don't know, tennis, then they know pretty much that the content, the videos and the photos in there are going to be appealing to them because they like tennis. So yeah, there's going to be and is a definite movement towards niche in that respect. And as you say, the same is true of messaging. So if you know that you've got a group of friends that are interested in, say, I don't know, co-working or something, then you could send them a link to an article about that subject, whereas you know that the majority of your friends aren't interested in co-working, just to use that as an example.
And where do you think that movement's come from? Is it something to do with the way that Facebook has been changing the feed so that it becomes unbearable, that they have to move somewhere else and they need this narrower focus of a group? Or is it a change in trend in our behaviour?
I think probably a combination of the fact that it is, as you say, the newsfeed is getting a bit cluttered up with adverts. And whilst there are ads in Messenger, there aren't in WhatsApp yet. There will be. Yeah, it could be people dissatisfied with the newsfeed. And as I say, it's pretty hard to change. But also, I think people are becoming more, they're becoming more sophisticated. So they are learning how to seek out the content that they actually want. and how to send the content they actually want to the right people. So that's where the groups and the messaging are coming in. I think another example of that actually is Instagram stories. Recently you featured there is that you can actually send now your story just to your close friends. So that's quite an interesting one.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that some people struggle sometimes to make sure they do send it to the right the right group or tick the right box to do that. But it's a good idea, because sometimes you want to use that same the software, the forum that you're comfortable with, but actually the content isn't appropriate or interesting to the wider public.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just giving people an extra option to narrow down their audience there.
Just while we're on Instagram, touch on using stickers for business, would you, before we could jump back onto Facebook? It's something we were talking about earlier, about how you felt that stickers could be quite useful in a business environment.
Yeah, sure. I think stickers are, on the one hand, they're very much a fun aesthetic element of Instagram stories, but they can really be used hugely by businesses and very successfully too. So stickers basically give you extra functionality. They're all around engagement, so you can really get some engagement going with your audience. So for example, you can run a poll, you can ask people questions, you can get people to ask you questions. There's an extra dynamic there that you don't really get on the news feed. I think they're sort of like hugely powerful. To give you a sort of bit of an off the wall one and a direct example of a business objective, say you were looking to collect leads, you could actually use the question sticker to collect somebody's email address if they were interested in your product or your service. Achieve objectives like raise awareness, increase engagement, and obtain leads and increase your revenue.
Yeah, they go a lot further than I thought. Instagram isn't an area I've gone into. I focus on very few social media accounts from a personal point of view. And working with people like you, certainly I listen to your weekly Facebook Live video.
9 a.m. on Mondays, the social media show.
I don't always have time to watch it, but I will have it in a browser in the background and listen to the repeat when it comes on. Instagram I find particularly interesting as a platform that a lot of people are starting to use over and above Facebook. And in certain circumstances, younger people are using Instagram like I might use Facebook, and they really don't like using Facebook. Instagram is the way forward in terms of business promotion, which I find quite alien looking at, because I don't use it. I'm not in that sphere.
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons for that. It's very much mobile, so younger people have grown up with the mobile phone, so they're very adept at mobile phone use, so that comes comfortably to them. And I think they're more comfortable at taking photos and shooting video as well, so which is an integral part of stories and Instagram. And then of course, not forgetting, there are 3 parts to it, so any one of the parts of Instagram could appeal. So you've got the main feed, which is where you can post photos and videos. You've got stories, which we've mentioned, which are a bit more informal, and then you've got IGTV, Instagram TV as well. So can't quite say something for everybody, but there might be just one of those 3 areas that you want to get involved with.
Yeah, I think it has a simpler premise as well. There's less mess, so to speak, certainly in the Facebook web interface. There's a lot going on. For me, it's useful. I love using the web on a desktop computer. It's much more convenient for me than an app on a phone where I feel constrained. But actually, you're right. It depends what you're used to. I want to touch on Facebook, if we can jump back to that, because I know that you actually touched on it, a post from Mark Zuckerberg, which was last night. I think you said it came through.
Yeah, yesterday, yeah.
Just tell us a little bit about that, because Facebook's been in the news quite a lot. Controversy over data leakage with Cambridge Analytica, and there's been lots of other little stories coming out. I'm constantly seeing stuff in my news feed about what they are and they aren't doing. I think this is something that's come to try and maybe get ahead of a lot of this. I haven't read the article yet, but I'll make sure everyone can see it. But maybe if you can give us your feedback on it.
Yeah, in summary, and it does need to be a summary because it was a huge 3,000 words. I mean, the key word is privacy, and there's a number of areas that Mark Zuckerberg was looking at. So messaging, which we've mentioned, a move from public sharing to private sharing. And when it comes to messaging, encryption as well, he talks about a lot. So at the moment, WhatsApp messages are automatically encrypted. And a lot of people don't realize, but you can encrypt messages on Messenger, but it's not very obvious, and it's not. Right. You have to do it on a message by message basis. So I think default encryption for Messenger is coming. Also, he spoke about more safe data storage. So only having Facebook servers based in countries where the governments aren't, to use his word, intrusive. So all in all, quite a few steps around privacy was the main gist. And as I agree with you, I think it's to try and get ahead of the negative perception at the moment. There was a study out last week which asked sort of which organizations do you most distrust, and Facebook was pretty high up on the list. So I don't think that would have made pleasant reading for them.
Do you think from the post they're going in the right direction? Do you think the steps that they're taking are something that will actually make big strides in terms of privacy and data storage and data handling? Because I think there's a couple of areas that for me are issues. And it's in terms of it's how they're communicating with people about what is actually happening and allowing people the choice how their data is being handled. There's the issues where there's things behind the scenes that they're doing that they're not telling people about. And I think between the two of those, the ambiguity of security and then, just things happening behind the scenes, which may be just a factor of the way they've been working, but it just shows that if they don't change the way the data is moved around or stored or handled internally, how do you feel that they are doing against that? Do you think they're working in the right direction?
Yes, to a degree, but with exceptions. I think I think this statement yesterday from Mark Zuckerberg is a step in the right direction. However, there are other areas, like it has recently transpired that the phone number that you logged for two-factor authentication was actually searchable. And last year it transpired that it was used for ad targeting as well. So it's kind of like you're giving up an information which is supposed to improve security and privacy, and then Facebook are sort of going behind your back and using that to target you with ads and to make you discoverable to other people. So I think there's a definite lack of transparency there. But on the other hand, they have talked quite a bit and at a very early stage about the merge of the messaging services, the merge of WhatsApp messages, Instagram direct messages, and Facebook Messenger. So I would say that's a positive because it gives people, rather than just sort of present that as a fait accompli on the day of launch, they're almost inviting discussion by bringing that up at a very early stage. In fact, when the newspapers and media got hold of that, it was like, the expectation was that it was going to be out in a couple of weeks, but then sort of Facebook had to rein everybody back and say, oh, hold on, this is just like, it's not even in the development stage yet. It's just almost a thought at this stage, a plan. Again, I think it's about options. You've always got to give people options, sort of merge, if you like, of those three services. It's not going to be compulsory, which is great. So you don't have to sort of opt into that. So in other words, if say you're on Facebook Messenger and you don't want to receive messages from people on WhatsApp or vice versa, that's not going to be a given. You can just stick with your Facebook Messenger if you want, and the same applies to the other two services too.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's not about them using people's data for making money through advertising. I think that's fine. I think it's that they've got to be clear with people how they're using that. People will then happily trade their data for a service of some sort, and allowing people different elevations of data usage, then they get different elevations of using the platform, or it unlocks it. It's just this hidden nature of what they're doing with the data, like you were saying.
It's a transparency thing, isn't it?
I totally understand what they're trying to do in terms of the data. It's just that they need to be, certainly as a company the size that they are, more beholden to their shareholders, really, and shareholders as in us, people who are using their system.
I agree. I think it's just an educational thing as well. Like you say, the service has to be paid for, and I'm pretty sure most people wouldn't want to pay a subscription, which has been ruled out by Facebook. It sort of has to be advertising. So it's just a question of people understanding that. You get quite a lot of articles and tweets and social media posts, sort of with people surprised, sort of saying they looked at a certain website or they purchased a certain product and then they saw ads for it on Facebook. Really, this shouldn't come as a surprise anymore. And quite often that's presented in a negative way. But for me, it's actually a positive because the ads are kind of like personalized and targeted. I would rather see ads that cater for my hobbies and interests rather than for stuff that I'm just not interested in at all. I think there's a lot of education to be done there, which, is that Facebook's job? It's an interesting question, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's difficult because you and I are interested in technology, obviously different elements of it, but we're interested in technology and how these things work. And so don't even give it a second thought. Where other people don't think about it at all. They're just using it as a tool. They're not thinking about how it works behind the scenes. and how it gets the job done, even how it's paid for, and until they really start looking. I'm all for targeted advertising. I actually think it is much more useful to get an advert that you actually will like because of your habits. It's how they're making that inference, where they're collecting data from, because there may be some sources who say, actually, I don't want you to track me in these different places, but I'm happy for you to look at this. And it's tricky because it's a lot of data to manage. And obviously, in some ways, they feel if we can take all of it, then we can actually serve you better. It's about transparency. And I'm interested. I think one of my issues with Facebook, and one of the reasons I don't personally like it or use it that much, is not so much various goings on in the background. It's more the utility of the front end. It feels so bloated with stuff that it actually has lost that initial utility that it did have in terms of just conversing with your friends, which is where WhatsApp comes in, or maybe people feel more comfortable on Instagram.
Yeah, that could be another reason. Going back to the previous conversation, there was an interesting post the other day. I hadn't really thought about it like this because I'm sort of in it almost literally every day. But if you actually took a screenshot of that compose box that there is now, like you say, which is basically there initially to communicate with your friends, and you look at the myriad of options that are underneath. I mean, I think there's about 17 or maybe as many as 20 now, different things that you can add and
create, post, video, live events. You've got tag friends, how are you feeling? Yeah, so you've got this sort of confounding array of options there, which is fine. I mean, it's like anything with an interface. Once you get used to it and use it, there's utility there. And, certainly that's easier if you're using it a lot. But for someone who dips in and out, actually, it doesn't provide much utility. So I want to move on now, Jonathan, to your rebrand of your website.
Yeah.
Now, let's see if I can share the screen so everyone can see your current website. In fact, let's bring up that previous article here.
Is this the moment where you're going to show my old logo?
No, I will bring that in a minute. Well, let's do that though. So this is where Jonathan came from. I've just done a Google search for Intranet Future, which was your previous company name and logo. Can you give us just a brief bit of the background as to where that company name came from, and then why you changed it, why you've moved forward?
Okay, so the first thing was when I went out as a freelancer, I guess there was a decision to make between, do I go for a business name as such, or do I go for my own name? Which is a dilemma that quite a few freelancers face, and it's a tricky one. I think there's sort of pros and cons for each option there. And my feeling at the time was that I just wanted to, it was something new for me, and I just wanted to sort of like arguably misrepresent myself as being bigger than I actually was. So I kind of like went for the slightly more, I suppose, prestigious, if that's I don't know if prestigious is quite the right word, but slightly more credible, that's a better word, credible option of a business name as opposed to my name, which nobody would have heard of. So, and that was the name thing. And the particular name was because I was very much working with intranets. I'm interested in future and predictions as we've discovered, and the name Intranet Future was available. I mean, that's a big thing these days with company names. Pretty much is taken with regard to names and domain names and social media. So that's what I went with. I mean, initially I was going to be doing more consultancy around intranets and internal comms, and that didn't happen. So I just never really got around to changing the name until recently, the end of last year.
So 8 years in, you think, I should change.
Yeah, it took a while, and the reason was twofold, really. As I said before, nobody had heard of me at that stage, but now most people do know me in terms of social media and my name. So I figured there was that. They never really, I suppose, align themselves with the Intranet Future name. It never really was much of a factor. Yeah. And also the name itself is pretty much meaningless now in terms of what I do. So I wanted to just totally transpose that and make it very obvious in terms of what I did. So hence Jonathan Pollinger, my name -- social media trainer, which does what it says on the tin, as they say.
Exactly. Yeah, there was always this difference between your brand going out there as Jonathan Pollinger, and then actually when you search for you online, coming across the website Intranet Future, like a disparity between the two. But I was just it's a big leap to make. Is there anything, were you anxious about whether you would lose, say, site traffic? People would not recognize you anymore?
Not the latter, because the recognition sort of would hopefully improve, and also awareness of what I actually did would improve. But yeah, there were a few technical concerns, so I had sort of my fears allayed talking to the right technical people on that, and also got a lot of support on the branding side from Visible, a company in Bristol, and they were very good on the name, on the color scheme, and that side of the branding, font, and all that kind of thing. So quite a big move, but certainly I would recommend working with experts if you are thinking of rebranding, because it is quite a big thing to do, an even bigger thing to actually get right. And then of course you've got implementation as well. So there's quite a lot to be done. And even now I sort of discover bits and pieces. Only this week I discovered that my Twitter on LinkedIn was linked to Intranet Future. So 3 or 4 months after it happened. So there is so many different things that you've got to change on different contact forms and websites, social media, and all the rest of it, and directories, of course. So I would advise people to try and sort of seek out an expert to help them.
And has it worked? Have you seen a better?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of positive comments in terms of the actual brand itself. I think it has helped. Nobody's kind of like mentioned Intranet Future being lost. Inquiries are good, and I would also say that there is less. That was another aim. There's less confusion now with an entire industry, really, which is sort of known as social media management, where people manage your social media on your behalf. So they're writing your posts and doing your tweets and that sort of thing. In essence, that entire industry is my competition. So I wanted to make it clear that my thing is training and not actually doing social media on somebody else's behalf. And that confusion has almost gone, I would say.
Oh, good.
I used to get a lot of calls and emails and people referring me work saying, oh, can you basically write this person's tweets? And I don't get that anymore, which is great because I think the message has got across.
It makes more sense for people when they meet you. The name is simple, but also that it's clear what you do. And I think that's so important. So many people do have a company or brand, but it's not quite clear what they do. I mean, we struggle with this a lot. I mean, we do marketing more broadly. We touch on social media, but that's part of it. But actually, there's still elements where we struggle with when people are looking for marketing, what element of it. Sometimes they're looking for people to do the work, like you said with social media. Generally, we don't do that. We've moved into a little bit more with Inventive People, our new project, but otherwise we don't. It's more about consultancy, like you, and helping and supporting people, and sort of being that person who they can rely on to sort of go through this interesting world of online marketing with them. So well done anyway. It was certainly the right choice. Definitely worth the leap, even though it was 8 years after. I think it's
even though it's a bit late.
Great. So I'm going to move on to an interview I had with a guy, Magnus Unerman, I think it is. He was talking about marketing automation. Broadly speaking, this is more email marketing, but it could be picking up signals from social as well. Also probably some sort of ad retargeting as well, but using systems to come up with a sort of process where you can then put that into not a machine as such, but a set of rules where people are communicated with along a timeline and hopefully nudge down your funnel, and also hopefully done in a way that is responsible. We were just talking about Facebook and badly managing data. So your data is either sort of things are happening that you don't know are happening behind the scenes, but also you're being bombarded with messages that are inappropriate. So the whole point of this is to help the promotion of a company to be more appropriate. I highly recommend people have a listen to that. It's on our blog now. Just look for Going Viral with Marketing Automation. Have a listen to that. I think it's a really good interview with Magnus there. I'm also had an interview with Alexandra Galvez, who is one of a top influencer on LinkedIn. She's got a really interesting backstory as how she started these LinkedIn local events. That was only recorded on Tuesday, so that's not going to come out for a couple of weeks, but look out for that on our podcast feed as well. That'll be coming through. And what else have we got? Oh, yes, we've got a new page on our website, a new events page, because I'm doing some workshops at Unicorn House in Cirencester, a variety of different workshops, all free, starting in March on the 26th, blogging and content strategy. So it's really looking at how you might work to put together some sort of timeline for blogging, what the ideas are, how you might generate ideas, what topics, everything really to alleviate a lot of the fears that stop people doing anything on that. Obviously, you can use some elements of those on social media in terms of putting a plan together, but obviously, Jonathan, if you're going to go into more depth, would be a good guy to speak to on that. This is really just looking at, if you have a website with a blog on it, how you can structure your time to write content for that. But we're doing a whole series, got them booked in all the way up until November when we finish with email marketing. Yeah. So it's really, really nice. It's a really lovely co-working space. Yeah, definitely register for those. If you are listening, this podcast may come out after the first event has already hit. So I apologize on that, but do book ahead on the other ones that we've got. And finally, I just want to touch on a funny thing I saw on Twitter. If I can find it, it was called If Baguettes Could Move. It's a very bizarre animation. But I thought what was lovely about this is I think the good side of social media. This is using social media in a positive way with a group of people where you feel you're going to get some response and you're going to get promotion from it. So this is an animator who's putting out to his following. Basically, he's got to make a baguette move in some advert he's doing. So he's trialing different ways of making it move. And I just love the discussion. If you scroll down, there's people, he's got some different ways here. He's exploring, people are talking about different ways that a baguette should move based on other animals, snakes and so on. I think it's a really good conversation without too much nastiness in there as well. And I think this is a good aspect of what the internet is about. It's sort of good, collaborative fun. As I've forgotten to do our sponsor, we'll do it at the end. And our sponsor is Inventive People. So you've heard me talk about this a few times. This is our way of people being able to buy mini projects worth of time with people who they trust to do work, such as blog writing, developing a website, helping with social, video production, that sort of thing. Because I found really that most people actually, while they might want consultancy from someone like Jonathan or I, actually then need help doing that sort of work. And while we don't offer that, we do know people who do. So Inventive People is a way of finding people to get that stuff done. And it could be, from things like call answering, helping manage events, helping with edit websites. Maybe your website's hacked and you need some help with that. So Inventive People is our site for doing that sort of thing. Yeah, and it's really a collective of people that I've worked with over our 9 years and built up over time that I trust. So really, things like if you need blog articles written, website update, new staff photos, case study, video, you go to Inventive People, find the person on there, and you can just buy it online straight away. And if you're listening to this podcast, you can get 20% off your first order with the code Inventive People. So if you just add that in at checkout, you'll get that discount straight away. Right. Jonathan, is there anything else you'd like to add? Anything else you want to promote that's going on at the moment? Maybe some workshops that you're running?
Well, I'm not doing any public workshops, but I have just started doing a daily video show as well on Instagram. So that's on really? IGTV. So I've been sending out a daily WhatsApp update with social media news and new features since summer last year. And just last week, I'm now doing a video version kind of that. But what I'm doing is taking one sort of new feature that's been announced or one news item and giving a bit of extra insight, context and tips around that. So it's a bit sort of extra on top of the daily WhatsApp update. It's really aimed, I would say it's not for everybody, but if you've got a strong interest in social media, definitely if you're a social media professional, then it could be for you.
Great. Okay. Yeah. So I've got it up on screen. I'll make sure people get a link in there as well for that. Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Jonathan. Hopefully we can have you on another time in the future if there's any key topics that you want to talk about.
Sounds good.
So if anyone wants to find the show notes for this episode, you go to our website, look for episode number 34, and you'll find it all there. That's on ratherinventive.com/podcast. You can send in your business, marketing, or creativity questions for our next episode as a tweet to @ratherinventive, or you can email hello@ratherinventive.com. You can visit our sponsor, which is Inventive People, and if you buy anything online in your first order, you get 20% off if you use the code Inventive Podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you, Jonathan.